And she methodically went through everything, and she gave you where, when, how, and why. She also gave you why.
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminally Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer, coming to you with my pearl-handled pistol cufflinks so graciously gifted to me by our content genius, Michael Rivers, who's behind the camera as we speak, making all kinds of faces when I screw up. But I'm not screwing up right now because this episode is brought to you by ContractsCounsel.com. Now, they're teaming up with eSign.com, so it's part of the same team, I guess. And so their ContractsCounsel.com is running into an issue. They've got a lot of clients, but not enough lawyers. And this is an easy way for you to stay at home, get paid to write contracts for clients. But it's just an easy way to make a little extra dough or make a lot of extra dough, depending upon how many you do. But we're looking for a lot of lawyers who want to make a little extra money, who work from home and can write some contracts for clients. We have a lot of clients and a lot of work. So go to ContractsCounsel.com if you're you use it if you're a client too, but if you're a lawyer, and we know you're out there because we have a lot of lawyers that comment and that are fans of the channel. If you're a lawyer, sign up for ContractsCounsel.com. You can make some extra money, do it from home. You can do it in your underwear. You don't have to put a suit on like this. And you don't have to deal with some overbearing judge who is on an ego trip. So ContractsCounsel.com. Sign up for it if you're a lawyer. And we're going to be promoting that over the next couple months. All right, let's get to why we're here. Why are we here? We're here to react to the closing of the Melly case. Now, closing arguments are given by both the state and the defense. The state goes first. Why does the state go first? Because it's their case. Whenever you have the burden of proof, you're the first one to go. But guess what? You also are the last one to go. They have the right of rebuttal. So the state gives their closing argument. The defense gives their closing argument. The state has the option to give rebuttal, and they almost never, lawyers like to talk. So, and, juries can only listen to so much. My closing arguments are almost always a half hour long. I don't plan it that way. I just go through the evidence and I talk about it, and I'm pretty succinct, and they're almost always a half an hour. In this case, the state's argument was an hour and 44 minutes. The defense's was just a little over an hour. There are studies on this stuff that juries can only listen so long. So let's get into this. Let's watch the arguments, and I'll stop it every so often. We're not going to play the whole thing. I'll watch the whole thing, but we'll react. Here we go.
So here's what we start with. Detective Moretti has an investigation that starts on October 26th of 2018. We have 2 dead bodies that are dropped off at Memorial Miramar.
One of the things you want to do in a closing argument is you tell a story. You remember that in the opening statement, you can't argue. In the opening statement, the evidence is going to show. Now it's the time where the rubber meets the road, and you got to tell a story. And one of the things I like to do, I like to address everybody in the room. Counsel, Your Honor, members of the jury. And she didn't do that, and that's just a stylistic thing.
Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. You have Cortland Henry, who's lying about anything and everything. He's lying about the location of where it happened. He's lying about when it happened. He's lying about the Mr. Demons.
All right, now you get into this and doing a PowerPoint. I think too many people rely on too much for PowerPoints. I'm not a big PowerPoint guy, but I am a visual guy. So if you have some compelling video, you play that, and you go through the exhibits if it's called for.
The defendant being in the car at any point that evening totally omits that. We then have the cover-up that begins. So the question is why? Why does there need to be cover-up? Because there was a murder that was committed, ladies and gentlemen, that's why. There were 2 murders that were committed.
Now keep in mind, how many witnesses did the defense call? 1. They just called the buddy. And he put Melly someplace else. Alibi. And if you look at... But what didn't the defense do? The defense challenged it a little bit in cross-examination, but they didn't put any countervailing experts up. They didn't challenge the phone location. They didn't challenge the trajectory of the bullets. They didn't challenge the medical examiner's findings. I mean, through cross-examination they did, but they didn't put on their own witnesses to challenge that.
And so from here, we're going to talk about and explain what we have, right? So Detective Moretti and the Miramar Police Department have to answer 4 questions. Who, what, when, and where. And so for the where...
So what don't they have to answer? Why? Motive is not an element of a crime.
I want to start with, where did the lethal shots come from? And let's start and focus on that part of the investigation. So the where, we looked at Chris Williams. If you remember, Sergeant Williams came in and testified and showed you how Blue Star works, showed you how shooting reconstructions are done with the trajectory rods. This explained how Miramar had made a good attempt, but they lacked training. So he came in and went through and is able to explain, as an expert in shooting reconstruction, what happened in this car. So we're going to start on the trajectory rods. If you recall, on the outside, the most important aspect of the ones on the outside of the car is they show that this was not a drive-by.
That was powerful evidence. That was very, very powerful evidence, because if Bortland's lying about this being a drive-by, there's only one reason to lie, and that's if they were slaughtered on purpose by the people in the car.
That they're coming in at 90 degrees, that there's no keyholing. If you remember, you learned about keyholing. That would be an angle of entry on that. So he then showed you the Blue Star. And if you recall, ladies and gentlemen, this chemical reacts no matter how many years later, no matter what attempt at cleanup is done. The chemical is still going to react to the presence of the blood. So then you have
See, when I give a closing argument, I do not like a whole lot of dead space, unless it's an intended pregnant pause for effect. And I like it to be seamless. Boom, boom, boom.
that reaction. And that reaction, ladies and gentlemen, tells you that someone is sitting in this seat. Because, as Detective Williams illustrated, it's where the blue star isn't. So where there is no blood. There's no blood where someone's would have been sitting. There's no blood where their legs would have been, and you can see on the V that's indicated on that. And there's no blood on the back of the seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does that tell you? The killer was sitting there. And there's no blood because something was blocking it from getting onto that area of the car. So what do we know as well from this car? We know that there was also that this door was closed. How can that be said? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the blue star here shows that this door was shut because there was blood on this door handle. You have from this as well the headliner. So the headliner shows directionality. The headliner shows the way Anthony Williams' head was positioned when he was shot.
This evidence is pretty powerful. You know, just the way the blood evidence came in and the way that the headliner is and just the trajectory of things. And then you got the rods. That presentation of the evidence was pretty powerful in terms of where the shooter was sitting.
That's one aspect of it. That DNA that was tested is all Anthony Williams, but we'll get to that. So the DNA, very strong support. 51.2 septillion times more likely to be that of Anthony Williams than any unrelated individual in the world.
Septillion. No, that's a pretty big number. In other words, there's no question that it's almost they can't say it's impossible, but it's virtually impossible for this to be anybody else's DNA.
That was from Kurt Rhodes. If you recall, he was the expert on DNA. He told you and taught you how DNA is done, how everything works. So now, putting those two things together, you can say, and the evidence shows, Anthony Williams, the way his head was in that Jeep, is that he is sitting in this front passenger seat, and as you can see, all the blood is dripping down the back of the seat. That tells you, ladies and gentlemen, and from the angle of entry when we get to the medical examiner's information, that his head was right here.
Keep in mind, there's a lot of forensic evidence, a lot. And the defense really took a gamble on only calling one witness. Because, you've heard the phrase, you only need to convince one person. Well, then you get a hung jury, and then you got to come back and try it again. They have to convince all 12 people that this is either guilty or not guilty, depending upon your perspective. So they kept it simple, and that's a gamble.
So then we have one of the things that Detective Williams relied upon was the shirt of Cortland Henry. If you recall, there is a spot of blood on the front of the shirt. That blood, as Kurt Rhodes then told you, belongs to Anthony Williams. What does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen? That during the course of this shooting, Cortland Henry has his back against the driver's seat and is driving wearing this shirt when the shooting occurs. You know from that he is not the shooter. Why? Because if he was the shooter, the angle to get that wouldn't have the blood on the front of the shirt. It would have it coming across the driver's side and towards the side of the shirt, not the front. So on here you have the blowback coming there, and that's, again, 32.2 septillion times more likely to be the DNA of Anthony Williams. So then we have the back of the shirt. And so if you recall, the blood on the back of the shirt is right here. And that blood, Christopher Thomas, a single source profile. So what does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen? That tells you that Cortland Henry didn't fire the fatal shot for Christopher Thomas. Here's why. That blood is coming from Mr. Thomas when he is shot. The blood's only moving like that, as you heard from Sergeant Williams, when there is a pulse, when there is pressure. Remember the garden hose analogy that he used and talked about? That's when you're getting the blood that's going to be coming out of the body. And on that, so from there, you know, Cortland Henry is ducked over and flinching away from Christopher Thomas. So he cannot get that shot on Christopher Thomas from where he is sitting in the driver's seat.
Well, keep in mind that Cortland Henry is going to trial in October, and she just admitted that he did not fire a fatal shot.
Even if he was in the back seat, let's argue that for a second. To get the blood there, he would have to have been completely turned facing backwards to Mr. Thomas and then turned and shot over his shoulder to get blood on the back of his shirt. That's not reasonable inside of a car. What is reasonable is that he's driving, the shot happens to Anthony Williams in the back of the head, blood gets on the front of his shirt. He flinches, comes down, shot happens to Christopher Thomas, blood gets on the back of the shirt.
So he flinches, flinching and not firing a shot is a feather in Borland's cap.
Since they grew up. But look at the stress being placed on this defendant as the only one bringing the money in, as the only person who's paying the bills. Look at the tension on there, right? Look at the...
That's the why. That's the why. They don't have to prove the why, but they seem to think that they have the why.
Issues and concerns with Mr. Williams, Anthony Williams, and the defendant's mother, that they're fighting an argument. The message is on there to that effect. So look at, for premeditation, you can also look at the manner in which the homicide was committed. Anthony Williams was shot in the back of the head. That was planned.
And premeditation, just so you know, can be formed in an instant. So the fact that he decides to shoot somebody in the back of the head that's unarmed, that it could have formed right then and there. It didn't have to happen. That premeditation did not have to form when they were in the studio, or even when they walked out of the studio. It could have formed just in a moment's notice.
When he was sleeping, so that he could not fight back. That was a premeditated, planned killing of Anthony Williams, where there would be an alibi already discussed. So then, Christopher Thomas. Premeditation, as the judge instructed you, does not require days, weeks, months of planning. Premeditation can be formed quickly. Example we used in jury selection. Going to your mom's house on Mother's Day. You forget to bring flowers. You reach down, pull some flowers out of her yard and give her to those. That is premeditation. That is thinking about something, then doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you the murder of Christopher Thomas was premeditated in that as well. Chris Thomas, as you saw with Sergeant Williams and Mr. Howard demonstrating, oh my goodness, what's going on? Mr. Demmons then made the decision at that point he couldn't have a witness. So look at that. Those are all things in which you can get premeditation, how it was committed, the wounds that were inflicted, the back of the head. Going to Facebook. Showing again that the different information that you have before you belongs to this defendant. 772-713-9807. And that Melly, Montana, at iCloud.com is the email. Remember the Snapchat? Melly.Montana? These are names that the defendant uses over and over again to talk about and communicate and identify himself. And look, that phone says verified.
Having that phone identified as Melly's phone is really the key, one of the key pieces of evidence in this case.
As belonging to Jamel Demmons. Also remember Facebook.
Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, when you put shit online, it's a permanent record. It just is. So whether it's, having a beef with somebody or having a fun time with somebody or committing a crime online, it comes back to bite you.
As October 26th of 2018, sun's going down, and the defendant's phone also shows him at this location in Cocoa. And he is dancing and singing and performing, wearing the same jacket, an identical jacket to what Chris Thomas was wearing the night before, and showing Mr. Henry wearing the denim jacket, like Mr. Williams was wearing the night before. And so the question was posed about a contractual agreement and losing money to be there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, look at the text messages between Mr. Demons and his mother. Because he wasn't worried a couple of months before about missing a show because he was getting his hair braided and losing $1,000. But then this night, when his friends are killed, he's dancing and partying around and is worried about a contractual agreement.
So that kind of flies in the face of what the defense one and only witness said. If you remember what the defense witness said, it said that Melly was crying when he heard about it, you know, blah, blah, blah. And look at him the next day, just kind of, you know, like it didn't happen.
Just look at those types of information and those types of behavior and how someone is acting. Snapchat. If you recall, this is the argument between Mariah Hamilton and Jamel Demons, Melly Montana. Board, coming everywhere with me, because if them crackers come grab him, it's my fault he forgot. I keep Portland with, because at the end of the day, he did one of the realest shit in my life. Yeah, he covered up a murder. Did a very terrible job of it, but that's what he did. That's what this is referring to. This is less than 2 weeks after this homicide occurs, and that's what they're talking about.
And was there anybody to testify about anything different about that? No, there wasn't.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have a confession in this case. The defendant, and now look at the time. Remember we talked about the UTC? So subtract 4. So UTC 2,000 hours. You subtract 4, 1,600 hours. You do the conversion. So 4 p.m. 4 p.m. I did that with the smiley face.
If he is really that stupid to put in a text message, I did that, and it was specifically referring to this homicide, this double homicide, and the jury believes that that's what that means, he's done.
And that's what I said in opening. Context is key. The whole floor is coding. Awesome if you work at Google. Terrible at Broward General Hospital. Context is key. So you've learned PZ Gambino, as you heard from Detective Moretti, is potentially facing federal firearms charges, the gun dealer, is told by the defendant, I did that. Shh. And look at the messages between Mr. Demons and Mr. Gambino. PZ Gambino is a blood gang member. Uses all those same information, slang words, changing of the letters that you learned about from Detective Polo. October 26th, he asks to reach out to see how the defendant's doing. And the defendant says, I did that. And to make a spelling that, other times he uses DAT. And gentlemen, you saw the song where he has a song that he's released called THAT in his phone.
What she's referring to there is that the defense made a point of bringing up that you look at all of this other text and he uses dat for that. And so he said there's an inconsistency there. I don't know if that's really that powerful.
So again, Instagram and how these all fit together. 6:58 a.m. Jamie King, RN, the defendant's mother. Are you here? I'm in Miami. I'm by the stadium. I'm a mess. I'm so worried. I'm here. Well, remember those CDRs where you kept sending her to voicemail? Ladies and gentlemen, this shows that she's trying to contact her son. He is ignoring her, and so she's reaching out to her son, who responds back with, I love you, Ma. I'm good, Ma. Because he had the phone at that point. So the judge read you the law.
That is powerful because he's responding directly to his mother. So if that's not his phone, who is it?
Anthony Williams is dead, and it was premeditated. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you the evidence very clearly shows the defendant was caused by Jamel Demings. Same as to Christopher Thomas. Talks about premeditation. Principles. So if, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that Cortland Henry, and Cortland Henry is charged, but that's for another jury on another day. If Cortland Henry assisted and helped and shot.
She's kind of talking about Henry's responsibility, and it's really not part of this case, but it's something that has to be considered down the line. And if there's an acquittal here, that makes that case that much harder. Because you heard her say in her closing argument that, that Portland Henry did not fire any shots. That the fatal shots did not come from Henry at all. So if the principal's acquitted, that makes it that much harder for them to get a murder conviction with Henry. But I don't think that's going to happen.
2 individuals to help out Mr. Demings. Mr. Demings is just as guilty. Because a principal is someone who decides to help before the murder is completed. And you have that with Mr. Henry, and making that drive and going out to the edge of the Everglades. You have that. He is a principal to first-degree murder.
I mean, they were in the middle of fucking nowhere. And that right there, it can be a huge thing about premeditation.
To first-degree murder. Mr. Demings is just as guilty, and so is Mr. Henry. So, in my few remaining moments, I want to briefly touch on the unlucky 13, because I'll give Mr. Adelstein, Mr. Henry. He's charged, right? So, from all those unlucky 13 people that are listed as suspects.
Now, remember in their opening, they talked about this person, this person, this person, this person. And these are people that, one guy admitted that he did it, and he was in jail at the time. When you have these high-profile cases, people come out of the woodwork.
They have one thing in common, and only one thing in common. They made a single online threat. In poor taste? Yes. Any other evidence that ties them to this case? None. No location data. No communication from anyone in that Jeep to say where they were. No DNA of any of those people on that Jeep. No ballistics evidence at their feet where they were sitting in that Jeep. No private confession. Because remember, all of these online threats, they're out there for the public because they're trying to get attention and trying to get some sort of benefit for that for themselves. Distasteful? Yes. A crime? No. There's no drop pins for an emergency pickup from any of those individuals. There's no phone for any of them at any of the scenes in this case. So, motive. We talked long and hard, but we don't have to prove motive. Motive, it's intent. Intent is an action of the mind. So I'll give you.
So the reason does she really need this PowerPoint? I mean, what I don't like about those is that they focus on the screen instead of your message. And the defense, or the state has a different job than the defense. They need to go through all the elements. They need to go, show how the evidence in the case stacks up and meets every one of those elements, because that's their burden.
Motives. Anger. Greed. Resentment. Advancement in the gang.
That advancement in the gang is a huge thing because that's part of the death penalty enhancement. So without that, they don't have the death penalty.
heard $16 million was coming into Jameson Francois, and that you saw $15,000, $10,000 payments going to Mr. Demons. Simple math. Splitting something 4 ways or 2 ways with Mr. Henry, who wasn't smart enough to even properly give a statement to keep Mr. Demons away from the car. So we have all these pieces of the puzzle that we have just talked about. And each and every
So this will be a visual. This will be interesting to see how this comes together.
one shows how this case has been brought together. Shows the physical evidence. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's no murder weapon, right? The question that you have to answer, and that you can now answer based on all of this evidence, is that Jamel Demons was sitting in the back seat of that Jeep. And he was the one that fired the fatal shots that killed Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. And you know that because even if you choose to disbelieve one part of the evidence, 2 parts of the evidence, you can see what the overall picture is. The overall picture puts Mr. Demons in the back seat of that Jeep. It puts him holding a gun. You don't need a murder weapon to know that he committed these 2 crimes.
So let's critique her a little bit. She's kind of monotone. Kind of hard to listen to her for an hour and 44 minutes, which we didn't do that, but we just took some of the key things out. But what does she have on her side? She's got a lot of evidence on her side. She's got a lot of forensic evidence that was basically unchallenged. So whether it was the DNA or the trajectory of the bullets, and she methodically went through everything, and she gave you where, when, how, and why. She also gave you why. So we put out a poll about 20 minutes ago. We got about 1,500 responses. It's a 71 to 29 for guilty. And I think unfortunately, that's where this is probably going to wind up. So this is just part 1. We're going to do part 2. So stay tuned for part 2. We'll watch the defense closing. And I think you're going to see a much different style. And as you know, last week I was in trial and I was victorious. And my client was looking at a very serious felony case. And the jury came back within about 3 hours and after they got their lunch and acquitted my client. I'm going to read you a letter that my client wrote to me, and this is why I do what I do. I love what I do, and I love this. Today is the first day in almost 3 years that I did not wake up in either a state of near total panic or of hyperanalysis and overthinking. It's both lovely and quite strange. Some days were certainly better than others, but there was always this malevolent presence pressing on my shoulders. Throughout the course of this, especially during the trial, it became apparent that this was more than a job to you. Bruce, early on, you told me and my wife that you consider your clients family, and that because of that mindset and practice, what happens to us greatly affects you personally. Your empathy, humor, and directness blended with your professionalism, experience, and savvy in a way that showed me that you had my back and that we were not alone. It's a terrible thing to have one's life flipped upside down. How much worse would this have been had you not been there for us? For all the losses that we have had to endure, the sleepless nights, the gut-wrenching, knee-in-the-guts bullshit that pressed down on us, much of what sustained us is knowing that we had a kick-ass team on our side who actually cares about us, not only as clients, but as living and breathing people. Money can't buy this. Money can't buy this. This is why I do. You wonder why I do what I do? Because you help somebody protect their life, and you get a letter like that. So we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Make sure you subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, sign up for Patreon. And if you're a lawyer, sign up for contractscouncil.com. Good way for you to make some money. See you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. 23-hour lockdown, police is at my god.